Welcome to another learning session, everybody. I'm really excited to have Mark here today. I've known him for, gosh, around 20 years. We used to work together at Arnold, and just a great, one of the nicest guys in advertising for starters. But he's been kicking around quite a bit. He used to be out in the Midwest at various agencies, but also with various bands that he was in. He started Undertow Music Collective in 1995 with friends from Uncle Tupelo, Wilco, Sunvolt, the Jayhawks, one of the first five indie labels on then new Apple iTunes. He joined Simmons Durham, became an executive creative director for Jack Daniels, and ran that account for 10 years. Joined Arnold in 99 and became a managing partner and executive creative director. Realized a lifelong dream to live on the West Coast and moved to Portland with his wife and young kids and founded North, an agency out there with Rebecca Armstrong. Um, Ran North for 18 years with blue chip West Coast clients like Columbia, Keen, Hydro Flask, and others. And now, excitingly, we got him at a really good time. He's starting a new music collective to foster good partnerships between artists, brands, artists and brands going headfirst into big changes with AI, rights, publishing, IP ownership challenges, and opportunities. So he's got a lot to share. I'm going to turn it right over to Mark and take it away.
Yeah. Hey, everybody. It's really nice to be here.
Hey, Mark.
Met a few
Hey.
of you before. Hey, Ernie.
Hey, Mark.
Um, yeah, well, like Will said, we've known each other a long time, and he left out a very important part of that when we first met at Arnold, I realized that Will was a bigger Beatles freak than me, and I didn't think one of those existed. So, um, Alan, good to see you again.
And how are you?
Yeah, it's been a while.
It's been a long time.
Well, I put together a little something. As Will said, the key thing here is that I'm kind of not kind of. I have uh, we've I've run north in Portland here in the Pacific Northwest for the last 18 years since I was at Arnold. Came to Portland around 2006, and we had, just because of the small agency business, my partner Rebecca and I have initiated a merger with uh, my who I think is my doppelganger on the East Coast, David Baldwin. It seems like David Baldwin and I have lived the exact same life, even to the point where now our prior agencies are merging. But I'm it's given me an opportunity to pursue something that I've just done organically in my agency life all these years as a creative director, which is to pull in my musical life into partnerships with brands and really cool projects where I've brought people in to do things that are really fruitful and mutually beneficial relationships with brands like Hydro Flask and Columbia Sportswear and Jack Daniels. And now I'm going to kind of go at that full time, and I'm just going to share with you guys some of the thinking that's going into this, what I'm going to do. And my hope is that everybody in the Ideasicle Experts can use this as a resource. And I'll just give you a little bit of background on what filled it in. So I've been calling this, just generally, it's not the name of our of the library and the venture that we're doing. I'll get to that in a second, but I just kind of call it music forward because I think of it two ways: as brands that are music forward tend to do better right now. Music is becoming, it always has been, and I'm very conscious that I'm talking right now to probably the most amazing group of experienced creatives in the country. So I'm not going to like give anybody lectures on intuition and creative process and all those things. But I will say that for me, I continue to be amazed at how much music continues to assert itself in our culture, in the industry, as a really powerful way to break through and a really powerful way to engage people. So I really love that about it. So I've tried to help the brands I've worked with, particularly at North, and when I was working on Jack Daniels, I've tried to really move those brands to think of themselves as music forward. And then it also is a nice phrase because, once again, music is going through just seismic changes, and I want to talk about that in a second. I have a couple of truths that I still believe very strongly. I'm not sure if it was Louis Armstrong or Joe Strummer or Duke Ellington who said it, but there are only two kinds of music, good and bad. And that sounds kind of jokey, but I have held on to that tenet for a lot of years, and it kind of guides me and reminds me that intuitive sense of what works and what doesn't is still what drives me probably the most in this. Music is deeply personal, so that's the superpower for brands, right? That's the emotional connection of music is a universal language. It's a way to get to how people are feeling. If we do our diligence, we kind of find out about our brand's audience, and it's just a really powerful and honest way to connect with people and engage them. Uh, I I think Kendrick Lamar may have started something at the Super Bowl halftime, but music goes all the way back a lot of years that creates movements, right? With this movie about Bob Dylan that's out right now captures that really beautifully, I think. And most of all, it's human, and we're going to talk about AI in this, but largely there's been tons of technologies that come into music that both on the brand side and in the music industry embrace or reject. But ultimately, my thesis is that it will always be a human language, not a digital, not a technology language. So what do I mean by music forward brand? I'll just give you guys a really simple little, this is a little bit work in progress in development, but essentially what I have done for all those clients all those years and had it be very successful is I do start with research. We do go in and try to understand the audience from a psychological standpoint. And I particularly as a creative director would ask our researchers, really help me understand what is like a basic emotional need. All the way back to Jack Daniels, we did an intersect study and we found that the badge that worked for everybody, we had a billboard for Jack Daniels that just showed the bottle and it said found in fine establishments and questionable joints everywhere. And that was an illustration of how the brand had this universal appeal. But what was that? We found what it was unpretentiousness. That after a year of intersect study with a huge sample, we found that was sort of the desirable emotional need was for people to be perceived as unpretentious and genuine and honest. So I drove the music programs around that. I created something called Studio Number 7. And I think sometimes these kind of things can come from research, but you also intuitively know in a brand its DNA once you're into it and you're doing a full channel plan, you can get a sense for those kind of things. But that is really the first step in a music forward brand is how can music fulfill a particular emotional need. And I'm going to share this deck with everybody next week. I told Will I'll do a version of this that has links in it that you guys I hope will be a lot of fun to go in and see some of the stuff that inspires me and this hopefully this might give you the deck will give you some notes to go back to if you're thinking about this in the work. But these are a few of the things on the right that are literally have been taken from some of the intersect studies that I've done with Columbia Sportswear and Cliff Bar for music programs and Keen and Hydro Flask. And what happens is we find that when we understand that emotional need, then we are able to we can even index what kind of genres, what kind of crossover appeal is there between genres, what is the purpose of music in the audience's life? And once we know that, we start recruiting or we start thinking about who are the right people to bring into it. And I'll get into specifics of that in a second. But what's different about this is we now have beyond just hiring somebody for a piece of music and then letting them go. We have so many open spots where that can become part of the brand's fabric. So this is a nice, not a complete list of all the things that I've done with various musical artists on brands over the years. And these are the ways that also the artists feel like they have more of a commitment. They feel like they're more embedded into the process, into the creative process, and they have a say, which I've found, goes so far with musical artists particularly. Just an example of that is, I did that process for Columbia Sportswear. I worked with CAA and we brought in the pop singer Kesha and the country singer Luke Combs. Couldn't be two different musical genre artists, but we found that they landed directly in the sweet spot for Columbia's audience. Columbia's audience just didn't think of the brand as being culturally relevant. And we did this program and we had nearly a 50% lift in brand affinity. And yes, this brand's for me, which Columbia hadn't really seen. They were always a value proposition. So this was a really successful example of that it's a little deeper, of course, but those two slides I just showed you. So I also wanted to just give you guys a little bit of a top line on how developing the music is also something I'm really proud of that I've done that with the artists. It's not just, hey, you guys go off and do this, come back with it. we get involved in the creative process with them. And I have found that every artist from Amine is a rapper here in Portland that I've worked with on a number of projects. He was very walled off in his creative process to most people, and we found that he was just really loved finding out how we develop these things with brands. And there's been other artists too that have just surprised me. Magnetic Fields, if anybody knows that band, the main songwriter of that band was famously introverted and never talked to anybody, and he worked with me on Southern Comfort, and he was amazing in this process. So in the developing of it, we kind of come in and we make sure the artist knows that we're not asking you to do a jingle. Yes, jingles sometimes are awesome. Everybody loves a great jingle for a law firm for accident insurance, accident practice, or for a mattress store. But generally for the brands that I've worked on, jingles are just a little too cynical. They're just a little too marketing. So the other thing that I found is that you go into a lot of editing suites, and an editor will have access directly to a lot of stock places, and stock is great. I want to be really clear. I'm not here to say that there are a lot of really great stock license libraries out there. In Portland, we have Marmoset. There's some ones with bigger reach, but the key thing for me creatively is that I found is when I was bringing music in as like a needle drop or a bed or what we might call wallpaper, I just found that the performance was dropping off. And so what I really dug in on was I, as a musician, understand how important music theory, even though I'm a completely self-taught musician, I never went to school for music theory. What I found in the overlap of my life as a creative in advertising and branding is that things like tension and creating movement, even harmonics, there are some artists that just do harmonics where they're competing, where one line goes down in the bass and the line goes up in the treble, and that creates a tension, contrast of tones, of instruments, dissonance, tones, modalities. I have found that working with musical artists, that when we tell them we want those things from them, that becomes really effective in music for brands. And it creates this whole sort of universe of music for a brand as opposed to just a track that gets used in a spot. Um, when I send this deck out, I'll put links to the stuff that I love diving into YouTube and hearing things about this as it relates to building a musical world for a brand or a musical language for a brand. Some of the artists that do these things particularly well, these are two very basic. The one on the right, the notation there is an example of the harmonic, like kind of going in different directions that creates a really, and you don't feel that in a music bed, right? You don't feel that kind of thing happening when something is just sort of a flat bed to sit there and support a voiceover. So I've learned how to weave these sort of things in, even in a voiceover or a narrated spot or a dialogue spot. I've learned how to post score with artists and create music tracks that can both be a signature for the brand and then weave themselves in variations throughout the work. These are just artists that I get very inspired by when I work with artists with brands. These particular ones, Nina Simone, of course, the Beatles, that's in there for you, of course. Vaughan Williams is in classical space. Kendrick Lamar, again, is an incredible, there's a reason he won the Pulitzer Prize, and that's largely for his lyrics, but his music is incredible in the way he uses some of these, particularly up on the left, the way he uses recapitulation and repetition of themes and builds on that. Solange is an amazing artist when it comes to messing with rhythm and tempo to create that tension and to create an interesting sort of emotion out of it. Radiohead and The Smile are famous for that. Bjork and Miles Davis is really the one that kind of taught everybody how to do it for real. So again, these will have links with some fun rabbit holes to go into on YouTube. So, for me, the questions I ask myself when I go in and are just what we always ask ourselves as creatives. And this is where I'm kind of preaching to the choir, but this is the kind of thing that is a good reminder going in, even with music, to zig the zag, right? To think of the opposite that you think that would support the music. The question is, the music doesn't just support it. The music can be a character in the story that you're telling creatively, even for a brand. This was another example of that where I brought into the guy on the right is the guitarist for Death Cab for Cutie, and the woman on the left is an amazing singer-songwriter on the West Coast named Laura Gibson, and they're both best friends. And for Hydro Flask, we wanted something that felt very inspiring to get people to feel like they were seen, and the people who love to be active in their life. tend to get pegged as, woo-woo, and tend to get pegged in the West Coast as sort of hippie-ish. So we wanted to let people know that just wanting to be active in your life is not a negative thing. It should be affirmed. So we kind of gave them a one-word brief that was like, we know the two of you are good friends and you go hiking on Mount Hood every year. Can you just write a song about your friendship and that around being outside? So we didn't ask them to write anything for Hydro Flask. We just asked them to write this song about what this journey that they do up on the Timberline Trail. And what came out of it was a music track that was about 3 minutes long. It was like a pop song. It was it was very counter to, it was not very outsider sounding in terms of acoustic instruments. It was very electronic. But it ended up being the signature song for Hydro Flask for 5 years. We created up to 25 different versions of it with different artists. The song itself streamed 2 million times on Spotify, and that was purely through organic mentions in social for Hydro Flask. There was nothing paid behind this other than the fact that we protected the ownership for these two in terms of the song. They still own the song, which is very rare for a client to offer that right now, but that's my mission, is to get brands to understand that publishing and ownership should be shared with artists, not bought out. So this was a really great program that I'll throw links into that so you can see how that branched out for years into lots of different things that I showed you in that earlier slide. So getting into the tech and the tools, the one thing, again, I feel like I'm going to be preaching to the choir a little bit, because we all picked up Macintoshes back, right? Like, I know I was at the age where I picked up a Macintosh right about the time I was in an agency where there was nothing but drafting boards and rubelith sitting around me. So everybody knows what tech does. But in the music world, it's amazing sometimes to remind ourselves that in just 100 years, we've gone from a place where the only kind of delivery of music was live performance to a place now where we've gone from the top left picture to AI in less than 100 years. And along the way, there's always been the catastrophic, what everybody thought would be the catastrophic change, right? Even when Bob Dylan went electric, the world turned upside down. So drum machines were going to kill drummers, and synthesizers were going to kill string sections and orchestras, and Pro Tools was going to kill engineers and producers. And none of that has ever happened, right? So I don't think that's going to happen with AI. It's, some of this was rolling down a hill, whereas AI is like jumping off a cliff for sure. But, I just kind of feel like if you really look at it, like if you come at AI the same way that I did with Pro Tools, with plugins, with synthesizers, with drum machines throughout my last 35 years of making music, AI does not scare me at all. It's just a tool, and it's not possible to use it without a human driving it in the right way, because and it may be at some point that for some ears people would say, well, that song's good enough for me. But yeah, I want to make a t-shirt out of this, human over digital. But the key thing that I've found is that, I think that Tim probably talked to everybody about on the first version of this learning sessions, is that what of course we're learning about AI is the art in it is in the prompting. The art in it is how to write in. Basically, you're like a code writer, right? You're like telling the machine what to do. But the thing is, we are so far away from the machines being able to be intuitive, because they're only relying on everything that's come before us, which is completely human made. And the machines don't know how to find that quotient that is human, especially in music. Now, I'm not saying that AI can't necessarily, is starting to be able to do that with video, but right now we're seeing things that the uncanny valley is there, and it's true in music. And yes, in 5 years, the best of us might not be able to tell the difference, but there is still going to be the notion of storytelling and tension and arc and things that humans have done with music that is going to be technically impossible, at least for another 50 years, to be recreated digitally, I think. And I've talked to a number of people that I think are pretty good experts in this. So, I've gone in and done a lot of thinking about this. I've spent the last year going in and playing around with AI. I've probably got at least 10 different tracks that I've spent sometimes a week thinking about the prompting on. I did this one last night, just thinking about having this discussion. And I thought, well, what if I only spent 5 minutes and I did it right off the top of my head? And immediately, one of the tricks I tried to do to it is I tried to put very competing ideas into it to see how it would go. I we'll put the link to the song. I'm not even going to play it. It is so freaking bad. It's unbelievable. And this is, I think Udio is probably the best of the music AI programs right now. But even with what I thought was a pretty textured, pretty nuanced prompt, it really threw it off. And what it came back with was something that just it sounds terrible. So I do think that that notion of going back to this for a second is what I wanted to do when I share this deck with you guys is that if anybody gets into it, or if you're working with a musician and comes in and says, I want to do AI, I want to use AI to do this job. The thing that we've learned as creatives in advertising and brand are the same things that any musician needs to know when it comes to a brand. A brand needs a story, a brand needs an emotional engagement, a brand needs to make you feel human. So what, my first suggestion on that, if this deck can be a tool of any way for everybody, is to say, just really think about the same things that we do when we think about concepts, when we write, when we art direct, when we design. Composition of design is the same. It's the same principles. So that's kind of my take on AI. And have I got to a place where I've used it for a brand? I used it a little bit over the last year. We did some work for Wigwam Socks up in Wisconsin, and we just cranked out a bunch of video. And what I did is I started with some tracks that we had recorded, and I wanted to see if AI could take the melody that I fed to it, and I wanted to see if it could do it on a couple different instruments. And it did a pretty good job with that. And the performances weren't so totally convincing, but they didn't need to be in these videos. So that's an example of how I've done it. But the prompting that it took to get there, even on an instrument on a track that we had already created with humans organically, that took almost a week of getting like one instrument variation right. So that's just to give you a little bit of insight into somebody who's, from my perspective and experience.
Just a couple more minutes.
Yeah. So the last thing that I wanted to just share with you, and I'm going to share with the whole Ideasicle expert group, is this is a working name. We don't even have, this is very this is very yet not yet launched. So I'm kind of pulling the curtain back a little bit. We have a working name for this with the word scenic, and we're really thinking of it as a music collaborative. And what we're going to have is a pretty vast catalog of originally commissioned songs, tracks, and scores from artists that I've developed relationships with over the last 25 years. We are actually working with those artists where what will be available to anybody who comes into this library is what we call open splits and mixing stems, so that even an editor you're working with could just start with the bass and drums if they wanted to, and then they could bring in other instruments, and they can even do a little arranging around a film edit or a radio edit. Those are the kind of, to me, those are the sort of flexibilities around music that get you to that extra, that get you to that next level that feels like it's great work. And I think one of the most important aspects of this is that all the music in this library was made for with artistic intentions and not commercial intentions. And there are some music houses that I think do absolutely fantastic work, but if there's one thread for me, that music that is originated for a commercial purpose just never seems to have the same something that grabs people emotionally as music that is artistically intentioned in its origin. So that's what I've decided to do. And I'm just going to switch over here and show you what that looks like. We're building it in a platform called Disco, which is what a lot of music supervisors in film and television use. And what we've done, and I'll show you the artist page. This is the artist page shows you all these relationships that I've developed over the years with different artists. Lisa Germano used to be John Mellencamp's violin player. She's just an amazing artist on her own, and she's part of this. The list of people here is just pretty great. Most of these people I've worked with or am networked with through the years. We're continuing to, every one of these people, every one of these artists, we have rights arrangements developed. So what this is going to be for everybody here is this is a password protected library. And you would be able to go in and get any piece of music out of this. And we have built in a filtering system, so you can get into some filtering. There's some playlists that we're developing that we think would be good for, to think about in different brands assignments, different creative assignments. And then there's a way for you to kind of keep your music listed as favorites. But again, there's a lot of filtering in this. So we're just really building this out to be launched over the next couple months. But when I say launched, it's never going to be consumer or public facing. It's going to be password protected for artists and creatives and post-production folks. So this is something I'll share. And if anybody ever finds something in this that's inspiring or works for a brand, one of the things that we're going to do too is we're going to help be a stewardship, as I've done for brands and artists, and creating partnerships and creating, ongoing partnerships so that a musical artist is involved with the brand creatively and not just a gun for hire. And even to the point where we currently have a few assignments of doing kind of a brand language, or a music language, I'm sorry, for smaller brands that I'm talking to out here in the West Coast. So this will be it's really fun to go through it. There's a lot, again, all of this music was not commissioned for commercial purposes. This is all music that these artists feel like they want to license, they want to sync, they're okay with it going out into the world for film, television, brand use. And I think it's a pretty special little gold mine, personally. And Will's been in here and digging around, and I think he can attest to there's some pretty special music in here that is now, completely rights, all of the, where this is also going to be a very rare thing for the music industry. The artist will get almost all of the licensing in this from anything that it's commissioned for. But there's a lot of tracks in here that they're willing to commission for, say, $500 for multi-channel use for a year or two. So yeah, so that's a little bit of a review in this. And again, what I hope about this is that it's something that people go into and they just spend if nothing else, it's a great repository of music you're just not going to hear on Spotify and Apple and whatnot.
And I don't think that's a small thing, Mark. The fact that most of these artists are not terribly well known, I think, is a huge opportunity for brands to go in and be a leader from a cultural standpoint and introduce an artist in a big way through a TV campaign or something like that nobody's ever heard. It just reflects well on them and is, of course,
Exactly.
great for the artist. Anybody have any questions? We've got about 3 minutes left. That thing is really fun to search,
Yeah.
I have to say.
Nice stuff. I'm looking forward to looking through that because I'm terrible with music. Being a drummer, I'm just still terrible with music. So like, if I've got to, do a rip video, I don't know where the hell to go, so
Yeah.
this would be super helpful. Thank you very much.
Yeah, that's the need for me that it came from, is I got tired of editors just pulling CDs out of their rack. And of course you can't license that stuff. It's too expensive for most clients. And also it's usually not the right music. So that's what this is built for.
This is awesome. Thank you.
Yeah.
Hey, Mark, what's the average length of the tracks that you've got on there?
That's a good question, Alan. It's anywhere between 30 seconds, 15-second bits to 3 minutes, 5 minutes. So and also, like I said, there are loops and stems, and we're also going to be adding even samples that even if you want to sit down with GarageBand and bring a sample in and build something yourself, you'll have the rights to do that with some of this music. But the thread of it is that it's all human made, right? It's all, and that for me. And it's all genres too, by the way. It's indie rock, it's jazz, there's a lot of hip hop in here that we've been developing relationships with some amazing artists up in the Pacific Northwest. Has a great hip hop scene. So it's kind of everything. If you wanted something that was there for a 5-minute narrative, and I think all of these artists, and every one of them we've talked to in the agreements, if they need to come in and post score something with the idea that's within a track and post score a 20-minute thing, that artist is ready to do that.
Oh, that's awesome.
That is
Yeah.
cool.
And is it curated by artists, or is it curated by kind of feel or whatever you're looking for?
Yeah, it's both. You can
Okay.
I'll go back just really quickly. I know, Will, we're almost out of time, but I'll just to answer that question, I'll just show you. When you go into this, up here on the left are all the filters.
Right.
This is kind of where you go in, and up out here on the are the filters, and you can do it by mood, feel, where we've meta tagged all of this. We've done it all, ourselves. You can do it by instrument, by tempo, by lyric themes, whether vocals or instrumental, genre. Type of music type of music is where we use. You can see the price of that track for usage, and there's the durations. You can filter it by duration, but then down here under Discover, you can click on artists, and that's where all the artists are. You can go discover them on their own, and playlists is where we're starting to curate things that we think for brands and creatives in the brand world would be useful. So,
Right. That's cool. That's very cool.
yeah.
It's so cool. It's
Yeah.
so fun to play with too. Mark, we got to end it there. Thank you so much for doing this. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, this was great. Thanks. It was
Mhm.
really good to see everybody too. It's been,
Yeah.
been quite a
Yeah.
while.
Good to see
We
you,
should
Mark.
do this more often.
Thanks
Yeah.
so much.
Thank you.
Appreciate the
All right.
time.
Cheers,
All right,
everybody.
see you guys.
Good stuff. Thanks.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.